I'm Larry Platt of the Philadelphia Citizen. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, I'm Roxanne Patel-Shepalavi, also from the Philadelphia Citizen. Welcome.
So that was our hype video to get you in the mood to defibrillate democracy in the American city where it was born. We have a lot of work to do, and that is our mission. Through all our touch points. For those of you who don't know, the Citizen solutions journalism meets thought leadership events like this one, meets calls to civic action. Because some of you have heard me get on this soapbox before, just liking something on Facebook is not civic engagement. Actually getting off your ass and doing something is more in keeping with, yeah.
Like all of you who've come out here tonight.
Exactly, in 103-degree weather or whatever. You are truly super citizens. So welcome, and Roxanne will fill you in on some of the folks we are indebted to for pulling this kind of thing off, but also some of our other events that we want to see you at.
Larry has set me up, so this is what I'm going to do. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Bellwether District and the HRP Project, Brandywine Realty Trust, Campus Apartments, Clark & Co. and Property Loss Consultants, Darko Capital, First Trust Bank, and our partners for the series, Drexel University's Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation, and of course, Fiddler Club. Can we give them all an applause? And then we have upcoming. Hopefully we'll see all of you at on July 30th. Our next event is our RAD Awards. It's the second time we've partnered with RAD girl Leah Kaufman to bring back the RAD Awards, in which we are honoring about 14 totally kick-ass women who have done a lot for Philadelphia in the last year in a whole bunch of different categories. It's a super fun party. It will be here. So please come if you're able on July 30th.
And just another nod to the Fiddler Club, which is quickly becoming a crown jewel of the city, one of the most diverse spots in the city. So if you're not a member, become one, and you will find me at the bar. And then the other thing on our sponsors, I just want to underline. Darko Capital and Campus Apartments is the Edelman Family Foundation, and we're indebted to them as well. So let's get this party started, and then these guys will talk for a while, and then we'll hear from you with some questions. This is not the U.S. Senate. There is no filibuster. So when we do questions, try and keep it to a reasonable comment in terms of time, or more preferably an actual question. Tonight we're talking about one of the hot button issues that faces Philadelphia and every city across the country, with two all-stars in this field. Angela Brooks serves as the Chief Housing and Urban Development Officer for the City of Philadelphia. She came here after serving as the Director of the Illinois Office of the Corporation for Supportive Housing. Brooks oversaw training, lending, technical assistance, and systems change work throughout Illinois. Prior to that, she spent 10 years with the Chicago Housing Authority, where she worked on the largest redevelopment of public housing in the United States. Many of us were very excited to see Mayor Parker import Angela Brooks to the city just recently. And finally, secondly, Bruce Katz is the co-founder and inaugural director of the Nowak Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University. I'm going to deviate from the actual, because he's also a columnist for The Citizen, a good friend. When we say the Nowak Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University, that's a reference to our founding chairman, Jeremy Nowak, who is also one of the reinvestment fund he founded, and one of our close friends, and one of the, like Bruce, one of the most innovative thinkers on cities in America, and we lost Jeremy way too soon. Bruce regularly advises global, national, state, regional, and municipal leaders on public reforms and private innovations that advance the well-being of metropolitan areas. He's the co-author of The New Localism with Jeremy, How Cities Can Thrive in the Age of Populism. He also is the former chief of staff for HUD under President Clinton, and has forgotten more about cities than I'll ever know. And secret data point on Bruce Katz is he also knows more about the Beatles than anyone I've ever met. So without further ado, Bruce Katz and Angela Brooks.
So, can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. First of all, thanks for braving the heat. Usually it's snow or rain or something like that, but pretty bad out here, but good air conditioning tonight. Good choice, right? And just a shout out to the Philly Citizen. I mean, media in this country at the local level, as we all know, has been completely devastated. But Philly, I think, is just so fortunate to have the Citizen. And you know, so many of the tough issues are really put before everyone. Angela, before we really geek out on housing, okay, mention that you came from Chicago, but take us further back because you grew up in Seattle, you've been in New Orleans. I mean, you know, maybe just tell us how you got here, and then a few this is a Philly crowd, so a few good impressions of Philly just to get ready.
Well, you know, I can start with the Philly one because all I've seen is City Hall in my apartment. So I look forward to all of you telling me where I need to go now that I have a little bit of work-life balance. But at first, thank you for having me. I don't know what I did in life to be on stage with you, so I'm super humbled to be sharing a stage because I'm like, how did I get up here? I'm like, wow. So thank you for all the work you've done. You've been an inspiration to many of us. And I forgot to be a fangirl and bring one of his books so he could sign it, so I'll be following up because I want my signature. But I think the story of how I got here is a little bit interesting in that I am from Seattle, and my parents, like many, migrated to Seattle from Eden, North Carolina, Monroe, Louisiana, and I always had a fascination with cities. And my mom, having gone to a HBCU, my dad going to UW, my mom was like, if we raise her in Seattle, which if any of you have ever been there, it's not the most diverse place to grow up. She's like, she has to go to a HBCU. So I actually went to college in Mississippi at Jackson State University, and that's when I majored in urban studies and got, at the time I thought I was gonna be a lawyer, but I got really interested in like the built environment, particularly living in Mississippi, where in the early 90s when I got to college, there were still places that essentially still had outhouses. And so I started getting really interested in like, how do we develop and why does land develop the way it does? Like many people whose families from the South, eminent domain really was the story of my family. If you ever take I-20 through Monroe, Louisiana, you're driving over the house that my dad grew up on. So like all of these things and the equity in that got to be really interesting. So that led me to New Orleans, where I got a master's at University of New Orleans in urban and regional planning. And that's kind of when I got interested in housing, honestly. I'm not the greatest student, so I had a little fun. So my dad cut me off because I had to get a job, and I was a parole officer. And how I specifically got interested in housing, because at the time I thought I'd be the planning director of some major city by the time I was 40. I had to detain a client, and she brought her daughter, and I had a choice to either take her home or call Child Protective Services. Like, well, I'll take her home. And at the time, somebody was home, so I took her home, and I took her to a public housing development that at that moment, up until that moment, I thought was vacant. And then I really got interested in housing because I couldn't believe we had government-sponsored housing that looked like that. And that shifted my whole trajectory. So from there, I went home to Seattle. I worked for the city of Seattle in the Office of Housing. Anybody who knows anything about Seattle, I can't afford to breathe there, let alone live there. So that's what took me to Chicago. And at the time, going back to my housing authority desires, I really wanted to work for the Chicago Housing Authority as they were really doing the largest redevelopment of public housing. And I was fortunate enough to do that and really work at, you know, lots of equity issues there too, but really got to work on reimagining how public housing should work and really looking at mixed income housing. And so after that, being at the Corporation for Supportive Housing, at the time, I thought affordable housing and permanent supportive housing were the same thing. It isn't. And it was a really great 4 years of really learning about the supportive services, and it's really when I started getting more interested into housing as healthcare, because we looked at a lot of the frequent users of emergency rooms, and it was just simply for housing, not for illness. So it really kind of expanded the look I had. And what ultimately brought me here was, as I mentioned, I can't afford to breathe in Seattle. And while Philadelphia is getting more expensive, there is still obtainable housing for at least middle income and maybe upper lower income, but that can change so quickly. And so when you start looking at, you know, what Philly has to offer, you look at the region and how compared to New York or DC, it's still attainable. That can change quickly with hybrid working, and you've got a mayor and council that are hyper-focused on it, and so it just seemed like a really good opportunity and a really great time with the political environment, at least locally, that's focused on that, and the state. I mean, the state's doing their housing plan, so it's just really good timing, and it kind of brought all of the things I've been doing throughout my career together.
What attracted you to come here? I mean, in some respects, you occupy a position. We talked about Atlanta a bit and how Mayor Dickens there had declared housing's my number one, number two, number three issue, and I'm going to build up capacity inside the city government. I'm going to start a strike team, and there's a whole range of things Atlanta is doing. Was that the attraction, was to basically be at the center of the activity?
Absolutely. One of the things we talked about earlier is my counterpart in Atlanta. I actually talked to him when I was interviewing, and just hearing the excitement of what he's able to do, and to think like, wow, if I can do that in Philadelphia, that even though I'm not from here, I have a family that's around here, and just thinking about a majority minority city that has high ownership rates and doing what we can to preserve that and grow it. It was just a really exciting opportunity, and thinking about innovation, because if you want something different, you have to do something different. So thinking about leading that work, Mayor Parker is probably the most convincing person I have ever been in a room with. Like, I tell her all the time, she could sell ice to someone in hell. And so when I finally got to meet her and hear her energy around the cleanest, greenest, safest city with economic opportunities for all, because I do think housing is the baseline for economic opportunities, and is really starting, as we start thinking about economic mobility, it is going to be the requirement for the city to grow. And just the opportunity to do that is what really attracted me. I think it was just really timing.
So let's start getting into this incredible initiative that you are about to drive, I suppose, with a hell of a lot of public capital behind it.
Yeah.
And let's just start walking through the initiative. What are the goals? What are the aspirations? How are you going to measure success?
We're still kind of figuring that out. So for those of you who are not familiar with Mayor Parker's Home Initiative and its Housing Opportunities Made Easy, it is a goal in her mission to create or preserve 30,000 housing units in her first term. I mentioned we're 1.5 years in, right? And so I think one of the biggest things that's going to measure success, aside from, obviously people having the 30,000 unit number being a very measurable goal, but I think for me, we are going to be implementing 7 new programs and continuing and expanding programs that we know work. Philadelphia already has a really great housing infrastructure, and there are programs that are not funded at the level they need to really take off. So we'll continue to invest and expand that. So seeing those wait lists go down for programs like basic systems repair or the adaptive mod program. So that would be one easy measure. But we've got some new innovative programs that we also want to implement, like One Philly Mortgage, which will be really modeled after the Massachusetts mortgage program, that will really allow us to expand home ownership opportunities to many lower income or in credit challenged, if you will, expand credit opportunities to people who wouldn't be able to get traditional mortgages. And the opportunity to really work on that is super exciting, because I think about people like myself who up until recently had heavy student loan debt, or all of those things that really are impeded from getting into the market, and just thinking about that. But one of the really exciting things that we will know is when the city works better. So one of the goals of the home plan is to make the city more efficient, and I mean it in the traditional way, not how it's being used these days in government, and making it work faster. So part of the mayor's executive order that she did in February was to have internal look back. So every department that touches housing has to think about what are the barriers that they put on housing that can either be removed or changed to make it go faster. And so being a recovering affordable housing developer and having been on the other side of the counter, I have huge opinions of that. I sat on the Chicago Zoning Board of Appeals, have huge opinions on that. So just knowing that we're actually thinking about and taking our users or our customers' opinions and really thinking about how we can make it work better has been great. One of the things that's great about the home plan is, and there's a few of them in the room, we've got a home advisory board, and it's honestly, it's about 50 people, which when they told me the number, I was like, you all are setting me up for the okey doke. But it's 50 people that are on all sides of the issue who may or may not ever agree on anything, but we're all in the room. But it's really helpful to me because we can have those tough conversations in that room. So when I come out of the room, at least there's been some vetting and probably some cursing to make sure we're really coming up with something that's usable and workable, but really moves the needle on providing housing opportunities here.
So let's do a little, I mean, there's English, Spanish, and then there's HUD speak, right? So let's do a little HUD speak, get it out of the way,
Yes.
and then we could get to other issues. But the housing market, when you're at HUD, gets segmented by, percentages of area median income.
Yes.
0 to 30%, below 60%, 60 to 80%, 80 to 120. I've never seen any other part of domestic policy obsess over area median income more than the housers. So how does this plan think about those different portions of the housing challenge, but radically different households really facing radically different situations?
And that is one of the goals of the plan, and that's probably the most debated part of the plan, is we are expanding some of the programs, the AMI, to higher levels. And so there are those, and I'm agnostic in this room. There are those who have problems with some of the expansions. Actually, the Citizen, there was a really good article earlier this week that talked about the argument for market rate housing. So, and I'm pulling this out just so I can refer to numbers as well. So we've got about 9,000 of the 30,000 will be for deeply affordable units. 11,800 will be affordable, and when we say affordable, we're talking to 30 to 50% AMI. Workforce housing, which is 50 to 80%, we have about 6,200 units. 2,700 will be for like the workforce plus, so that's the 80 to 120 of the AMI. And then we've got, and it's kind of a random number, 300 market rate. And so that's what the plan goals are, and that's how it's split up. But the real point of it is, particularly when you start getting to the 80 to the 120 is, and I'm living this with my father all the time because he has both a pension and Social Security. He makes just too much for any assistance, but he doesn't make enough to afford to do things in the market around housing, so that means I have to supplement it. And so, the mayor says it often, and, people react however they react, but she's like, I don't want to put the have-nots against the have-little bits. And there's so many people that do not qualify for our programs because they're just a little bit over, and so expanding those programs so that'll encompass them. And so you're always going to have the people that think there should be more on the 0 to 30, and I spent 4 years of my life working in that space, and it's not that it's not there, but we also have the complementary plan that the Public Housing Authority or Philadelphia Housing Authority is doing, and they have their 20,000 units, which will be a complement and will target that same kind of lower income 0 to 30 AMI. So thinking about the plans as complementary plans and really working together. And then we have the Office of Homeless Services that has their target of 3,000 units on their own. So you've got all of these plans that will all work together that really can kind of meet the whole housing continuum, because we like to look at housing as a cycle. And so if you're worried about one and not the other, it just doesn't work, because as you would probably know better than anybody in this room, it's kind of like you have to think about the whole continuum. And that's what the plan is, the goal is.
Well, I really commend the fact that you've got these complementary efforts with real metrics to hold yourself against. And you're mayor, and you're elected.
It's the good and bad of it.
Okay, now we get to the fun part. And this is a objective, non-partisan statement. So you've come into this position in a part of domestic policy where the federal government has played an outsized role since the 1930s. A couple things have happened since January. We've had major reductions in workforce at the Department of Housing and Urban Development because of the Department of Government Efficiency. No more comment to that. We have a budget proposal that would dramatically cut funding for vouchers, block grant them to the states, et cetera. There are proposals out there to privatize the government-sponsored enterprises. On the good side of the equation, there seems to be a plus up on the low-income housing tax credit. But when you think about the goals that have been set for this city, with a federal government that is no longer a reliable partner, how are you going to pull this off?
Day drinking? you know, you know I think, we are cautiously optimistic. One of the things that I often tell people, and I learned early on doing affordable housing, is rich people make money off of it. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about the real implications. And if you're sending vouchers statewide, I think that's one of the good things about our administration is we have a great relationship with the state. We met with the governor's office today. The state is looking at their own housing plan. And so when we think about it from that perspective, I'm cautiously optimistic. But it also would be the argument for why we also are moving forward with an $800 million bond deal, because we can't depend on anybody else. So we have to have the funds available here within the city that we control to move the needle if we want to really address the housing crisis. And so that is probably the number one reason that was the decision we made, and that's why you see other cities like Chicago, Atlanta, and others doing the very same thing. Is it risky? Certainly, but do we recognize that if we don't do something, our homelessness numbers will increase? As we try to attract more businesses, there has to be housing. And then we also think about the human side of why it's the right thing to do. Preservation is the highest percentage of our housing plan, is to allow people to stay in their existing homes. And going back to Philadelphia having such a high home ownership rate, we want people to be in their homes they own, but we also want them to be habitable. And we don't want neighborhoods to be affordable because blight and because of the quality of home. So the timing is right. We're going to be cautiously optimistic. We're not going to call it an obstacle yet. We're going to think of opportunities, and we're going to think about how we can really use this as an opportunity to get the philanthropic community engaged, to get our businesses that are headquartered in and around here engaged, and really think about how do we get more private investment into the housing eco and get that moving to really move the needle and create housing opportunities for all.
So, and folks begin to get questions together here. How do you describe the Philly housing challenge? Because it's really quite easy when you're in Seattle or New York or San Francisco or LA. It's just completely bonkers, right? Yes. I mean, completely out of control.
Yes.
But what is different about the housing crisis today versus several decades ago is that it's moved really all across the country. It's hard to go to a place that doesn't talk about the affordability challenge, and it's moved up the income levels, right? And so it's manifested itself pretty much everywhere. And so not surprisingly, tomorrow there's an election in New York. Affordability, number one issue, and housing, the number one affordability issue. Next year we have 36 governor's races. I guarantee you this is probably 1, 2, or 3 top issue. So housing is broke in the U.S., but Philly is not like some of these other places. And you started to get into homeownership rates higher, different kind of stock. How would you kind of weight the nature of the challenge here? Because that would help drive the kind of response you're going to implement.
I am honestly still learning, but another thing we didn't say in my bio, for the last 2 years, I've been national president of the American Planning Association, and for the first time in a professional organization is hyper-focused on housing, and certainly planners should have been a long time ago, but I'm biased there. But we worked on housing supply, and I've got to go to pretty much every state, and I swear it was so interesting. I got to interview the governor of Montana, and that little TV show you guys watch that's based in Montana has driven their housing cost. It's it costs the same in Bozeman, Montana, as it does in Seattle, which is insanity. And anyway, got to ask him kind of about his thoughts on it. And for those of you who aren't familiar, he's super conservative guy. But he said he started focusing on housing for the economics. And he was like, I recognize that we've got a lot of land, but not a lot of housing, and we've got to get out of the way. So they passed the Montana Miracle, which was a series of land use decisions that expanded their ability to do up to fourplexes by right in single-family zones, which you don't think of when you think of Montana having a housing crisis. You think of bison, for God's sake. So when I moved here, one of the things I thought about was just the opportunity. It's very similar to the South Side neighborhood that I lived in, where there was just a ton of buildings that were underutilized that could be easily and quickly and more affordably repurposed or rehabbed for housing, which is a huge opportunity that cities like Seattle didn't have, because Seattle's just not that old. And so it's an opportunity really to make it available, because when you look at, I forgot to ask Calvin Jeremiah what his prices are, but when I left Chicago, the kinds of deals we were looking at, building a new unit, an affordable unit at that, was about $550,000 to $650,000. That's not affordable at all. And, buying, I do know, when I met with Mr. Jeremiah, he was saying that when they're buying these buildings, which is their strategy to move the needle quickly, he's getting it for under $300 per unit, probably closer to $250. And so when you think about that, I think that's an amazing opportunity. But, we've got to start thinking, when we're thinking about the housing ecosystem, supply chain issues are going to continue to get worse, particularly given what might be happening with a war. So we've got to start thinking about all the things outside of the control of city policy that we can't control, and think about what it is we can do. So I think about driving around parts of Philly where there's a lot of vacant abandoned buildings, or even part of the home plan will be making city land more available quicker for housing purposes. So we've got to start thinking about all the things that we can control and making them available. One of the things I did when I worked for the city of Seattle was looked at our available vacant land and making it available for affordable housing. And certainly here we're looking at more kind of scattered sites, smaller sites. In Seattle, I was looking at 100-unit plus. But the point being, making our public land, we got to put our money where our mouth is. And our land is one of our most valuable assets. And so I think in our last figure, we look at about $1 billion worth of land that the city has in its control that could be made available for housing, which is how we got to the number of $2 billion with the investment that we're going to be making. So,
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the price and the cost differential between new build and acquisition and renovation, because to some extent what you have in the country right now is, the housing crisis has been simplified. We just haven't been building enough. And it sort of leads you to believe, okay, we got to build, and that is pretty expensive. And that $800 million, or I gather the full cost will be $2 billion, will go, it's not going to last very long.
No.
So acquisition, and perhaps even using land and buildings the city owns to sort of drive down the cost, and perhaps even getting into modular construction. All these ways to think about lowering the cost of providing the new affordable home.
yeah, technology has come so far. When I was at the Florida American Planning Association conference, one of their big sponsors was a modular company, and they had a tiny home, but like a true one, not just like it had a kitchen, it had a bathroom. It was amazing, and it's like their tagline was, "This is not your grandmother's trailer park." And they were right. And, I got to go to a 3D printing facility. I'm not there yet, but it's really cool to see the technology that's being made available. I never thought I would be using Austin, Texas, or any part of Texas as an example of anything good, but they've been doing really great stuff on really kind of being innovative and implementing new technology. We've got to start doing something different. What we're doing clearly isn't working. You've got report after report talking about how much we're underproduced throughout the country, and we've got to really think about how we move the needle. I was just at the World Urban Forum in Cairo, and we went out to, it was really interesting. So they are building a new capital, so there's New Cairo, and you can see it, but I'd say it's probably about 20 miles away. They've created this whole new community. I have a lot of ethical questions about it, but it's a low-income community with about 100,000 units that are home ownership. That's not even a model we're doing at a scale here to make home ownership affordable. Like, there's a whole bunch of other issues with what they're doing, because they're probably concentrating poverty, which we both know hasn't worked here. But they were looking at how could they make home ownership opportunities, whether or not their operating budget is going to make it successful for them down the line. All those questions are there, but they were really thinking about how they could do that and make some real equity options for their residents.
So at Drexel, we launched with Accelerated for America a national housing crisis task force. Bipartisan, Spencer Cox, Utah, so very similar to Montana in terms of dramatic spikes in housing prices. Mayor Dickens of Atlanta, Mayor Bibb of Cleveland, and a senior community development person at Fifth Third Bank, Susan Thomas, are all the co-chairs. And we have about 24 other task force members. We divide up all the innovative practices around land, construction, capital, regulation, governance. I would say, in terms of what is happening around the country today, which is happening across parties. You would never know this watching Washington, D.C., but housing really has become a bipartisan issue across the country. In terms of interesting pieces or practices that could be brought to Philadelphia, the state of Alabama, which usually ranks 52 out of 50 on just about everything, right, started this effort when opportunity zones were passed. That's the tax incentive that was passed under Trump 1. It's about to get renewed and expanded, where they basically were able to match a pipeline of projects across the entire state, urban, Birmingham, Selma, rural, and a capital stack, a private equity, debt, public investment, public assets, et cetera. The question is whether we're going to get opportunity zones. I mean, it's going to happen, along with the plus-up of low-income housing tax credits. This is a very wealthy metropolis. There's an incredible number of people, corporations, and others who have capital gains that can be put towards opportunity zones. Is that on the mix? Because if you go from $800 million in the bond funds to the kind of private capital you have to leverage, is that an innovation that should be tested or adapted?
You know, we've been hyper-focused on getting through the city council process in the 3 months I've been here. So now that we're past that point and we're in the implementation stage, I can easily say everything is on the table. You know, similar to Mayor Dickens, Mayor Parker has a very aggressive housing goal that we have to meet. And so literally everything is going to be on the table. You know, I think opportunity zones we got to meet with Secretary Turner when he was here, and he talked a little bit about that. And I think there's some really great opportunities, and I think the infrastructure exists here to really implement that. And so a lot of the meetings that we're doing now are both with the philanthropic community, the labor community, looking at how they can invest some of their retirement funds and pensions into this. So everything has been on the table, and it's been nice to have a mayor and council, I'll give them both credit, that's willing to think about things that haven't necessarily been done, because at the end of the day, it's going to cost some money to really move the needle and make sure that Philadelphia continues to provide housing opportunities for all. And I think it's really easy sometimes to get super focused on one way of doing things. And so it's nice to kind of see policy leaders really thinking about how can we expand private and public investment and make it work to really move the needle. So.
Yeah, I have a feeling that we're still early days on innovation around housing in the United States, because everything that we've charted at the task force, and we have an action plan coming out later this week with like 15 innovative practices, were all done when the federal government was stable and engaged.
Yeah.
And we saw Secretary Turner speak the other day at the Bipartisan Policy Center and said a lot of the right things, but you've got to watch what the proposals are. These are serious proposals to retrench federal investments and other pillars and foundations of federal policy. So all this is going to have to get compensated for, substituted for, at this level with the state. And Philly's a city and a county,
Yeah.
for better or for worse.
Probably for worse in these instances.
So you're going to need more, sort of tools in the toolbox.
Yes.
One other thing coming out of Atlanta. So and Atlanta borrowed, stole, plagiarized from European cities. They didn't come up with this. Hamburg, Copenhagen. Oh, can you hear me now? Perfect, sorry about that. So one of the things about Atlanta is that when they set their 20,000 unit goal
Over 8 years, right?
over 8 years, 30,000 over 4. Okay. They basically said, we can't do this unless we dramatically increase the commitment of the city across multiple levels, city government and private capital, to the goal. So they looked to Copenhagen, they looked to Hamburg, they looked to other European cities, and basically said, how do those cities use the land and the buildings they own and put it towards affordable housing production, preservation, acquisition, all the rest. So that's a machine in these European cities. I mean, these are public asset corporations that know what they own and are able to put them to use. So they created one in Atlanta, an urban development corporation. It's only been around a short period of time. Chattanooga's about to copy them.
Yep.
Tulsa has done a bit. Is this something that is also you're thinking about, or because this is a big deal? You don't do this lightly. Institutionally, it's a radically different way of operating.
We aren't there yet, but we are thinking about ways we can use the existing infrastructure we have with PHDC and PRA. We already have entities that have some of the similar freedom to do that. We just haven't used them in that way. You know, I think one of the things we're hyper-focused right now is the land bank. And we're in the process of doing a land bank assessment. Sorry. Oh, the slow thing I have to work on. They've been telling me that all my life. What I was saying is, you know, we already have some existing infrastructure in both PHDC, Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, and the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority that has some of the flexibility those entities have. We just haven't necessarily used them in that way. And right now we're hyper-focused. We're starting the land bank assessment to make sure the land bank is operating and is staffed appropriately to do some of the disposition that we need, because that's going to be our biggest partner. So I think it is on the table. We're going to look at all avenues. And, you know, we're obviously looking at this as one term because, you know, the mayor obviously has to be reelected. But, you know, I'm always a very optimistic person. So in her second term, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. Housing's not going anywhere anytime soon in the city. And so we're going to have to think about what's the infrastructure we can set up long after Mayor Parker is gone that will continue to make sure that Philadelphia is able to really produce the type of housing that Philadelphia needs. And we want to ensure that that happens and it's sustainable. And so that is one of the commitments. And I think my position is modeled very similar to their housing person. And so that is one of the things that has been driving kind of what we're looking at. And we looked at all of the cities you mentioned. Our consultants kind of did some best practices scan. And then, of course, when I was APA president, we did the Housing Supply Accelerator Playbook. So I was really deeply enforced in looking at housing supply and what other cities are doing. So we certainly, you know, don't want to recreate the wheel if it's working. But we also recognize that Philadelphia is super unique compared to a lot of those cities because there's such existing stock that we could be better utilizing, both city-owned and privately owned, and thinking about how we can better entwine and get those things working together.
Yeah, in some respects, you know, because of the APA, role you had, you probably are more aware of what's going on around the United States than just about anyone who would have been attracted to Philadelphia. Because, you know, when you go into a city and you talk to a housing commissioner or people in the housing space, it can be either super parochial, right, or super programmatic. I just do this thing, right? And you're moving now across really this sort of broad suite of issues, challenges, programs, capital, all the rest. So folks, you're like really lucky here to have Angela in Philadelphia. Okay, what makes you most excited about this? Because you mentioned before, in the last couple of months, you've been between your apartment and City Hall.
Yes.
What really gets you up in the morning and gets you out there?
This is going to sound like a really corny answer, but it's something that my mother made me do when I was younger, and I reassess it every so often and think of kind of about what's your life's mission. And so when I think about what gets me up every day, I really truly think my mission is to ensure that everybody has a safe, affordable place to live and thrive. And so that's what wakes me up every day and gets me thinking, which is super nerdy. And the other thing is just simply, I think what excites me specifically about this job is I think about what we didn't do in my hometown, and I say we because I worked for the Office of Housing, where somebody like me, if I wanted to move back home, could not. And the opportunity to be a part of ensuring that there are housing opportunities for all in a city that has so much history, that is such large minority home ownership opportunities. I couldn't think of a better job to do that would be kind of filling my passion and mission that I think I have for whatever time I'm on this earth. So that's really what does it. And I think what I'm most looking forward to is finally getting out, and I've been to a Sixers game. Y'all are real different. Really want to go to an Eagles game, and I'm not a Bears fan because the Bears do play here, and so I will not be in Bears gear. I want to do the sports scene because I thought Chicago was bad. At my first interview, I was here the day after the Super Bowl, so I got to experience Philadelphia folks when you all win. I hear it's a little bit different when you don't win. So I'm looking forward to that. We're going to a Phillies game soon, so I'm looking forward to that. But really looking at the work we do and how we can see some changes and what that does, and really testing out some things and really making Philadelphia, the affordable housing programs Philadelphia currently has are pretty amazing, and I don't think that we have done a good enough job really setting ourselves out to be a model. So we've referenced all these other cities, and it's not that they're doing anything better or different. They just market better. And so just making sure we're telling the story, that we're going out and we're talking about the great work we're doing, because Philadelphia really is a great city. And but it's been a lot of it is insular outside of sports, and so making sure we're talking about that, because it's not just the city of eds and meds and all that stuff. There's some real good neighborhoods here, and telling those stories and talking about the people who are able to stay in their homes because of the programs that we are providing that make their homes accessible for them as they age in place, or help the person that just bought their house and they got a questionable inspection and there's a few things they need to have fixed to make it great, but they don't have any extra money because they borrowed more than they should, but we have a program to help them. And those are the types of things that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've got such a rich network here, and having worked with Jeremy Nowak and the whole reinvestment fund crowd, and then other CDFIs and it is a really rich network in this city. It doesn't emote like a lot of other places. It doesn't crow a lot, right? And so in some respects, it's got the bones, both the physical bones, the stock, as you describe. It's also got a lot of practitioners who know what the hell they're doing.
Definitely.
Right? And I think there's just a lot of assets that could be leveraged here, but it requires a different perspective,
I think it's that, and I think part of why, and it's probably the reinvestment fund that had my position kind of created in the way based off of Atlanta, is there also needs to be a person focused on it. And so when you don't have one particular, I think the planning director, Jesse Lawrence, I read it in the newspaper when he was talking about my coming, he's like, she's going to live, breathe housing, because he doesn't have the capacity. He has a whole division to run. And so that's my role, is to live and breathe and to work within all the existing infrastructure and to make sure that we're having the conversations. Like, I'm on the road show now. I think I'm running my mouth about housing every other day, it seems. But to make sure we're out there, we're talking about it, and we're working together with people, and it's a direct line to the mayor's office, because unlike other people who've sat in similar positions of me here, I sit in the mayor's office. And so it's a direct line of communication. And that, for her, was, I assume, her focus point of having somebody in her office focused on it to reflect on her priority around housing. And so, I look forward to partnering with those of you in this audience that are doing the work, and certainly I get to sit with 50 of them the fourth Thursday of every month, so I get their opinions all the time. But just really being out there in the community and making them know about the great programs that make this city work and that have been working long before I got here and will work even better when I leave, because we're going to invest in expanding and really making sure the programs are working better, and more importantly, really making sure that city is focused on improving our customer service to make it easier to build and preserve and all of those things that need to happen for us to really address our underhousing supply here.
So you've got political backing, you've got capital, you've got a rich network of practitioners. You actually have a housing challenge, which compared to a lot of other places in the U.S., and this is just relative, seems more manageable. You have a crazy-ass goal, right? 30,000 over, I mean, this is a very serious goal. What are the one or two issues where you feel like this group, all friends, really need to understand, okay, we got some serious roll up our sleeves work to do. And again, I'll just keep coming back to the feds. They don't have your back.
That is true.
They do not have your back. In fact, they're ripping the wires out. So your job, I mean, under a certain kind of federal environment, would still be pretty damn difficult.
Yes.
Whoa, it's really complicated now. So you're already beginning to compensate, but there may be one or two other tools you better get fast. And others need to understand you need them, you know?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is going to be, particularly in the friend community, is the advocacy piece, state and federal, certainly. And then as we continue to move zoning legislation, part of the home bill was also 5 zoning bills that went through to start addressing things like in the CMX district, parking. So you're going to see a bunch of things in that kind of way that's going to need some local advocacy. For people who are like super YIMBY and all of that great stuff, there's still a lot of NIMBYs out there, so we need you telling the stories, particularly our nonprofit developers and the people who are working with people who need affordable housing. Storytelling is so important because it's so easy to think about the people over there when it's the person next door, it's your niece or your cousin. That does move the needle. And so I think one of the things I learned when I was president of APA is planners particularly don't tell the great story. We're going to be looking at doing a comp plan update. Get engaged, go to your meetings. I'm sure there's plenty of people in here who are members of RCOs or whatever that might be, but if you're not, go to the meetings, talk about the things you want to see in your community. We've really got to redefine what that looks like because we have to recognize that what we've been doing isn't working. All of us are going to have to accept some level of growth that we may or may not be excited about. We're all going to have to think about, you know, and I say this because I live in a neighborhood where it's the Hunger Games for parking, so I recognize it's an issue. I recognize it. I've gotten 4 parking tickets, no 5, and I've only been here 3 months, so I get it. But we have to think about, is my precious parking spot, which is probably if it's an enclosed lot, $50,000 at least per spot, is my car spot worth more than housing a unit? Because my parking spot, which I do wish I had, is it more important than somebody having an extra bedroom or going up on rent or a cost of a house? And so those are the types of conversations we really have to start having, and we have to realize that we all are going to have to take a bit of the share of that growth that's required, and what that looks like, we're going to have to start thinking a little bit differently. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's important that people in this room are at those meetings, because what I can tell you is the people who don't want any of it, they're definitely in the room. And so if I had to ask of anything for you is to be engaged. I think we started out saying liking on Facebook isn't enough. That really applies here. I think of the 5 years I was on the Chicago Zoning Board, with the exception of cannabis dispensaries, rarely did people show up. And granted, in their case, and I know we have a zoning board commissioner here in the room, so it's not slighting Philadelphia. The thing I like about Philly, it's hybrid. You don't have to go there. In Chicago, you physically had to go there, so you can still participate. So just get engaged and make your opinions known, because I promise you the people who don't think like you are definitely being heard.
I think we just had a phone call from one of the NIMBY folks. But
Probably.
They heard it was happening. One other thing that is interesting to me about a city on the East Coast is how large the city is. It's 130 square miles, which is basically, Atlanta's the same size, but Atlanta incorporated a lot of suburban areas, rural areas. Detroit's the same size. A lot of cities in the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, are a lot smaller. Now, this is also 1.4 million people, so you need all that space. But 130 square miles is quite a bit, actually, which gives you a little more opportunities than a lot of the land-constrained places in terms of growth. That would be new supply as opposed to renovation. And I'm wondering, how that affects, because this is a city of neighborhoods at times, I'm not sure folks really get a sense of how big it is, I mean, it's still not Phoenix, right, which is like 500 square miles, but it's still very big. And that may offer some opportunities.
Yeah, and that's also another way that particularly the researchers in the room, that's an opportunity for, we've got some great planning programs here. That's an opportunity for even students to get engaged in reimagining what some of that vacant land can be. I think one of the things I loved, going back to being APA, is when we do studies in different cities, and I don't remember what the students did when we were here in Philadelphia, but looking at them reimagining it from the whatever generation we're on now, from their lens, and just really thinking about what could we be doing, what can that look like. I think one of the things that we are doing with the city land now that we're moving forward with the home plan is we're going to be looking at the city vacant land and kind of modeling what could work within the existing zoning and sitting with each district council member to think about what land can be made available in their district for. A lot of it will be Turn the Key, which is single family development. For those of you who aren't familiar, that's super great program. Where the mortgage is kind of capped. So we'll be looking at that for sure, but looking at whether or not it can be duplex, maybe up to triplex. No, that seems to be about what most people are comfortable with without having a big battle. So looking at what that land is and just really assessing. So having an assessment of our existing property is huge. And then looking at the privately owned vacant land will be like one of those kind of wish list type things that many of you could work with us on.
So I don't know if there's a microphone around the room, if folks have questions. We have a question here.
And if you're going to be at my meeting on Thursday, you can't ask any questions.
I'll move around again. Keep it short and sweet, and say who you are.
Hi, Larry. Bill Donahue. Hello to both of you. Thank you for the work you're doing. Learn how to spell Eagles before the next Super Bowl game. I don't care. She knows how to run a government. You made some comments concerning the current political situation on the federal level. Long before this administration was in place, this was a failed policy. It was broken. He didn't do any of it. So how about if we focus on a solution? And what I've noticed over my lifetime, and I do community development in the poorest zip code in the city in North Philadelphia, one of the most violent neighborhoods in the city. And I watched the wealth of this city disappear before my eyes in my lifetime. And the thing that I never hear about in these discussions, I hear about a lot of appropriated money going out the window. I don't hear about job creation and living wage jobs for the people who you want to build the housing for. But once they're in there, they're still in the same economic situation. You're never going to fix this problem.
Great point.
I don't think either of us disagree with that point. I'll let you do a lot of economics, so I'll leave that for you.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the comment about the housing crisis has been with us for quite some time. So, and frankly, since the 1990s, the federal government really hasn't had a lot of new commitments, and they spent a good portion of time after the Great Recession just cleaning up. What my comments were more about is that there's a lot of support that's going to be withdrawn. That was all. But you're right. This crisis has basically persisted and magnified across Democratic and Republican administrations. With regard to the economic development piece, this city, this metro, needs to grow more high-quality jobs, pay decent wages, right? And a lot of this is a wage-price disconnect, which has gotten a hell of a lot worse. And that's true with people trying to buy a home. That's true with people trying to rent. That's true across all segments. So a lot of this is going to come down to, like the housing issue, what's your jobs plan? What's your economic growth plan? And a lot of that's going to start with, what is the special sauce of this city? What does this city do in a fairly volatile period that makes it more likely you're going to grow firms, attract firms, grow jobs, at good wages? So
Well, Angela, go ahead and make that case, because you alluded to it earlier. That we just had this budget passed, and the debate about it did boil down to like jobs versus housing. And I think you alluded earlier that doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Is that right?
It's an and. And to your point, I don't speak about it because I'm a houser, but I can say the city is currently hiring a new director of commerce, which will be hyper-focused on that. And I think you will start seeing, the mayor is hyper-focused on economic mobility. So I think you will start seeing a lot of focus on that. It's just not the side of the house I know a lot about. But I do think you're right, because if you think about it, if we look at the fight for a minimum wage of $15, we know $15 per hour is not a living wage in 99% of the country. So we know that. And we do have to start thinking about what we do and how we combat that. It's just not my side of the house. So the conversation is definitely being held.
Let's go right here.
Thank you. Yeah, you alluded.
Say who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Sue Lior. And you had alluded to housing ownership and the high levels of housing ownership. And you did mention some programs, but I wanted you to expand a little bit more. We have neighborhoods that, yes, people own the houses, but they can barely pay their water bills. Many of them have liens on them. And so this housing stock, which is owned, is really deteriorating at a fast rate. Have you been addressing that, and what types of programs do you have for that?
Absolutely, and I brought my cheat list because I anticipated that question. We have quite a few programs. There's quite a few programs, and I won't go through them all, but I would say that's where PHDC, or the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, comes in. And so the program that I think is most known is the Basic Systems Repair, and that's free home repairs to correct electrical, plumbing, heating, and limited structural and carpentry for like routine emergencies. So I think that's one, and I think that's probably the one with the largest wait list. One of the programs that will be new is even like curbside appeal program, which will be kind of matching grants for people, because we recognize that blight is a huge issue, and so addressing blight is one of them. There's also going to be a facade improvement program that's going to be a part of that for homeowners. This is all the list. So if you guys go to Philly Stat 360, you'll see the home program, all of the home program, but you'll see all of the programs that are listed that we'll be investing in. So there's quite a few for home ownership, and those are the two big ones off the top of my head, but you'll see a plethora of lists. But the biggest thing you really should do, and admittedly it's a thing we have to do better of, is just really encourage people to go to the PHDC website and look at those programs, because there are a lot of programs, and there's adaptive mod for folks who need to age in place, and there's things they need for that. There's plenty of programs. That's one of the things that is good about Philadelphia, is the programs exist. Whether or not people know about them is the next challenge, and so you'll start seeing a lot more social media around that. I mean, I think leading up to this, we did a lot of social media campaigns about people who've benefited from those programs telling their stories. So if you go to the City of Philadelphia site, you'll see that. But there are a plethora of programs to really assist homeowners stay in their homes and make them better. And then you've got the nonprofit, like Rebid Philly, is that what they're called? I just went to their work day. So you've got nonprofits that are doing that. It's amazing. They took a whole block and they went out and they did some pretty amazing work. So that's where we talk about our nonprofit community being great supporters for the work that we're doing, but more importantly, supporting homeowners stay in their homes in a safe, habitable way, because a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing is naturally occurring not because of anything other than it's deteriorated and it's not properly taken care of.
Right, because otherwise we would have a problem.
Yep.
Deteriorating neighborhoods.
Exactly.
Let's
At what point do you bulldoze or do you renovate? So
let's stay over here real quick. Say who you are.
Yes, Annette Jeffrey with Project Home. You know, Philadelphia has the highest rate of poverty, as was mentioned, and the fewest number of people unsheltered of the 10 largest cities in the country. Does this program...
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, we have the highest rate of poverty in Philadelphia and the fewest number of unsheltered people in the country of the 10 largest cities. So the question is, does this initiative help us get closer to being the first city to end homelessness?
I should have known you were going to ask that question. First of all, I think the work that you all do at Project Home is a great example of how we partner with others. This plan has some funds available for homelessness that will be operated from the Office of Homeless Services, but I think the work that the Office of Homeless Services will be their 3,000 units, and I think they got to that number based on ending homelessness. This will support them and provide some funding for that, but this plan more or less would not necessarily be the conduit for it to happen, but it will be a companion partner. But thank you for the work that you guys do.
We'll go right here.
Hi, my name is Michelle Saul. I went to a program last week which showed conversions from office buildings to residential, and I'm wondering if you're thinking about that. And one second quick question. Parents who are looking for new homes often want to know about the local schools. How are you coordinating with our school superintendent?
Whew, all righty. Don't know that I can answer the second one, other than acknowledging that we recognize that that is an issue. I can say I haven't necessarily, but it's definitely supporting the school district was a big part of the mayor's budget priority, and that reflects in the number that we are giving to the school district. But now I forgot what your first question was. Yes. Office conversion is a huge thing. It's not necessarily a part of the home plan, but it is certainly how we're thinking about how we need to look at the zoning and building codes to make that more accessible. You've got plenty of cities like DC that are going to be obviously really hyper-focused on that. But it is definitely one of the biggest things that we're thinking about that's not specifically about the home plan, but the Department of Planning is certainly looking at that as a viable option, particularly when you're looking at increasing housing in those commercial corridors where a lot of that vacant buildings are existing. And I would say a lot of cities are also looking at vacant schools and converting those as well. That isn't something on our table yet, but that might be something very, very soon to be discussed with the school district as well.
Just one thing I just want to, not entirely in response to this, but it could be considered as such. If you go to some other cities, there's philanthropic capital, patient capital that's not looking for returns in the near term, and there's market capital, right? This city has great foundations, but they're not at the scale. We were just talking about this, of like a Pittsburgh, which is a lot smaller as a city or a metropolis, but much bigger philanthropy. And in some other places, when you get to the office to residential conversion, the corporate community has basically put on the table what is essentially patient money, hundreds of millions of dollars, because those conversions are costly when you think about the design of the building, et cetera. I mean, it's still cheaper in many respects than new build in some cases, but it still requires other capital sources. So I do think this is going to be one of these challenges for the city and for the metro area. How do you bring in more philanthropy and bring in more patient money that enables the market to really take off? I mean, incredible stock when you think about the core.
Leave the country. We've converted 9 million square feet of non-residential buildings to residential in the last 30 years.
Well, and you have a housing. I mean, so it's whatever.
Examples here we can.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I want to talk to you after about that, actually, because that's the first time anyone has mentioned Philly as sort of a lead on that. But But a lot of these questions, whether it's the homelessness question, whether it's office to resi, it comes down to the, what kind of capital is available and what's the form of the capital? There's a question back there.
I want to ask a quick question that's been on my mind as we're talking. A lot of us who've been here a while are traumatized by past bold programs that didn't pan out. And I'm referring, the previous mayor floated, I think it was $500 million worth of bonds to do rebuild, which was going to refurbish 200 playgrounds, and we got 17. So speak to my worry that here we go again when I see $800 million or 1.3 billion when you talk about when you add up the interest on home.
Well, I don't come from a trust fund, so I need a job. So there's that level of accountability because that's kind of my job, and I assume if I don't do it, I won't have one. So there's that accountability. But no, seriously, I think one of the things that I don't have that level of history, but I'm assuming that's one of the reasons that the transparency of our dashboards to show where we are is part of that. But City Council did a really great job of writing into their ordinance reporting and annual program reports we have to do. So the next step for us is doing the annual budget and program statement, which will outline what we're going to do each year that council has to approve. And so there's going to be that level of oversight, and then we do quarterly reports, but they also added in a review committee. So that review committee will have 2 representatives from the mayor's office, 2 representatives from council that, I don't know what the frequency is, we haven't figured that out, will be kind of following the progress. And I'm assuming to address your actual concern in that program specifically, I've heard a lot. So I'm assuming those are lessons learned from there to make sure that that does not happen. But another thing that I will say is, of the programs in the home plan, I think like 26 of them already exist
Right.
and already have wait lists. So, moving money into BSRP, which already has a wait list, is low-hanging fruit, if you will. We're only creating a certain number of new programs. So the programs that the majority of the funds go with already exist, and we know they're working, and there's not a lot to do. So I think that should be a comfort, because it's not full of programs that have to be created and rebuilt. They already exist and are already working.
That made me feel better, actually. Thank you. Question, Harry. Yes.
I did have a question. I actually wanted to piggyback on the comment or question that someone else had about.
I'm sorry, say who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Penny Scott. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, but I lived outside of it for 34 years, and now I came back about 7 years ago. I'm really concerned about the homeless and about these office buildings that really can be converted to housing. One of the things that the mayor has done was to order everyone back to work in these office buildings, and I think that we need to have a different paradigm and be willing, meaning the will, to look at things differently. Not everyone needs to come into the office, and I know that there are businesses in Center City that the mayor wants to support, but if the people who can work from home worked from home, and the others came in to do other kinds of things and maybe lived in Center City, that's just something to think about. And that's not my wheelhouse. I'm a retired senior, but I think about these sorts of things. Also, AI is going to play, and no one talks about it anymore, but AI is going to play a very important role.
Is there a question? Just quick.
Yes, and I wonder how much you think about that as
Right.
far as the jobs that these young people in school now are going to have.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
AI, that's a great question.
You want to touch that one?
I would just say that if a city, and it gets back to this question about the economy, really, it was the first question. What are going to be the quality, well-paying jobs of the future in an AI world? If you go to Pittsburgh, right, they have Carnegie Mellon, #1 artificial intelligence undergrad and grad school in the world. And I would say AI dominates the economic development discourse in Pittsburgh. They talk about data centers and the power that's needed. They talk about workforce training. They talk about mitigating the impact on certain sectors, growing other sectors. So I do think that, I mean, AI will affect housing and housing delivery, but more broadly, it's going to affect the shape and structure of the economy in our cities and metros. So it's not your remit. I mean, you haven't been put in charge of everything. Maybe you should be. But it just shows you how complicated this challenge is at this particular time. But AI needs to be, if not the first focus of economic development, in the top 3.
Let's go over here for a quick, oh yeah.
Hi, I'm Sandy Smith. I think some of you here may know who I am.
Yes.
One of the things I'm thinking, both from the very first questioner and some of the other things you said, including, I'm pleased that you spoke about naturally occurring affordable housing. But one of the things I think we need to do is think small. You know, a lot of small businesses generate most of the jobs in the country. Small landlords provide most of the natural occurring affordable housing. We have programs here like Jumpstart that are like producing hundreds of small developers, building one house at a time. The city is talking in terms of these large agencies producing large units. Is there some way to like harness and encourage more of that? Or is this going to be part of getting to those 30,000 houses?
Absolutely.
Great question.
You know, part of some of the programs that are there, you know, are specifically around supporting smaller and black and brown developers. However, we're going to word it to get through the semantics that we are, you know, dealing with now. You know, I think one of the things we recognize that at least I recognize it because, you know, I'm hyper-focused on 30,000. I'm counting every unit, but it is supporting homegrown developers in the communities that look like people developing in the communities that look like the people who live there is a big part of the mission. And so, you know, I think Jumpstart is a great example of that. Love that it's duplicating across the state. Supporting nonprofits that have programs like that. PHDC also has a emerging developers or whatever they call it program as well. But then ensuring like some of these programs that are going to be helping to allow some of those small businesses to get access to capital, because one of the biggest hindrances is like one of the reasons we have access to bonding for those developers and those GCs, because that's an impediment and a barrier for many of them to grow in the capacity they need to. So when we look at some of the developers, when we're even looking for turn the key, the capacity of some of those developers to even do those programs because of access to capital is huge. So removing those barriers is absolutely a part of the plan, but ensuring we're working with the nonprofits that are helping them on that stuff. So what I saw happen in Chicago, which is a great example of why you have to think a little bit bigger, and this is a GC, but it could apply to a developer as well. For Walmart to come to Chicago, they had to use a minority contractor. So they chose a contracting firm as a black woman-owned GC, and she was doing all the work, but she didn't have the flexibility and budget to carry the cost long enough, and she ended up going out of business. So we want to make sure we're building up and making businesses sustainable. So that's why it's really important that we're working with others to ensure that, one, we make access to capital that is obtainable to those individuals, but we're also giving them the support. Because, you know, let's be honest, sometimes doing work with government, you might have to hold your money a little bit longer, you know, so you've got to be able to have the capital to do that, and that is a huge barrier, and we have to address those infrastructures as well, and that is a part of the home plan.
We'll take a couple more questions.
My name is Brandon Bailey. I'm owner of a mortgage company. I have 2 questions for you. One, you mentioned something about a Philadelphia affordable mortgage, right? And my question is this. Me working in the mortgage space, we focus a lot of our efforts on getting those people who make between that 50 and 80% mortgages, like through the Philly First Grant, things like that. Will there be additional programs provided so those people can get housing and buy homes for themselves? That's the first question. The second question is, I've been to a few different talks about zoning and rezoning, and one thing I heard, what you said, was that they're going to look at RSA 3, RSA 5, and make it multifamily by right. how feasible is that, and how soon will we see that actually roll out to the mainstream marketplace?
Let me just clarify. I'm not saying that necessarily. I'm saying that's what other cities have done. I'm not saying that's what we're doing. We will be looking at the zoning code in companion with looking at the comprehensive plan. I like my job, so I'm not going to answer how feasible that is, but what I will say is that is where advocacy is really important in the storytelling, and access and all those things are really important for those of you who are voters. Talk to your district council members. But the mortgage program we're looking at is based off of Massachusetts, and ours would be called One Philly Mortgage, and it's a 30-year fixed rate loans with a low down payment, and basically we'd be buying down the rates. And so that program still has to be developed. We would not be creating a bank. I always have to clarify that, because sometimes when people hear the mayor talk about it, they're thinking about we're talking about a public bank. We aren't. We're looking at working with probably smaller banks or regional banks that would be interested in the program, and then we'd be just buying down. And I think the mayor's biggest thing is expanding the ability for people who might not have the highest credit scores and expanding that pipeline, but for people like you, removing some of the issue and guaranteeing those loans. So we still have to tweak that, but that's the intent on that.
Let's get a
And if
couple.
you're interested, just look at what they're doing in Massachusetts.
Couple
It's,
more
an
questions
example.
here. Sorry, I'm sorry. Couple more questions here. I'm trying to be geographically diverse. Yes, sir. Say who you are.
My name is Kevin Wright, and I'm glad you're coming in here and talking to us, and I appreciate Cherelle Parker's initiatives. But the question I have is that everything is usually geared towards people who don't have anything and people who have everything. And I'm talking about the people in the middle who has a property or another property that that was handed down to them or left to them. So they might have two properties. They have their own property, and a lot of your programs, cities programs, are geared towards people who own their own homes, and not towards the little guy trying to be a landlord or something and trying to provide housing for other folks. It seems to me that the city of Philadelphia seems to hate the little guy, the guy in the middle. Again, the people who don't have a lot, they love them, and the people who have a whole lot, they can live on their own. But the people in the middle, the guy who has one property, maybe two, and he can't get none of those loans, because if you have a property that's worth $400,000, which some of us do if you're in the gentrified areas, you won't get any money if you're on Social Security. So that's another issue. So you have all this collateral, but nobody will lend you money because you're on a fixed income. So how are you guys going to address that? And again, everything is geared towards the people who don't have nothing and the people who have a whole lot. And I'm talking about the guy in the middle who has maybe one or two properties that he's trying to develop.
Gotcha. No, we got you.
We'll be around, so we can finish
you.
this conversation,
Yeah.
but I will kind of address that. And so any of you who know the history of Mayor Parker, she's a middle neighborhoods person. Like that's how she got her, like she's nationally known for that. And so she's been hyper-focused on that. So I can't speak to, like in the property sense, that there's going to be any program that explicitly addresses that. But part of the challenge we had with the home plan going through council is they felt like we were too focused on the person you're describing. And that's what the mayor kept saying she wanted to focus on, to ensure that we aren't eliminating people who are in that exact situation. And so we can talk a little bit further after, because, I don't know that there's any program that is specifically out there, but there are programs within PHDC that provide funds to landlords of small properties or small things, and Taya, you could probably talk about that, you used to work there, but there are programs that exist, and I think one of the things, and I think is Andy still in here, we've got the Appraisal Bias Committee to start helping with addressing that. We've got Tangled Title, because that's a huge issue here, and we're expanding that program. So ensuring that we are supporting people who own homes at all income levels remaining there is a huge priority. Now, how it tweaks for individual situations is different, so we can chat about that. I'll be here, or I'll give you my card.
Let's do one last question, and then we'll say goodnight.
So first I want to agree with what you. My name is Thomas Lopez Pierre, and I manage a social impact private equity fund out of New York. We're putting $1 million into Philly, $100,000 per black entrepreneur. Philly and Baltimore I just wanted to agree with you about the small entrepreneurs. I want to agree with this gentleman over here and over here. It's the guy with 1 or 2 properties that can't participate in the big programs, and he only needs soft cost money of about $100,000. The last thing I'll say is this: that I started my career in Harlem, New York. I saw what Mayor Giuliani did. He gave all the vacant land to very wealthy landlord owners. I pray to God that you here in Philly do not do that, or you'll be stranded 20 years from now without enough housing for people. So I love what this mayor is doing. I've been watching her program, and that's why I'm committed to being in Philly for 20 years. Thank you.
And I will just say, part of the land disposition authorization that we have is for the smaller parcels. So those will be for the parcels, I think it's limited to 1,500 square feet, so that will be the smaller stuff. The larger parcels that are available will go through the traditional RFP process, but looking at how do we craft RFPs or how do we bundle these that make it attainable for a wider group of people, not just the usual suspects, will be some of the focal point for some of the Department of Planning. So it certainly isn't just so the big guys, you know, we are a majority minority city, and so we've got to make sure that we're providing opportunities that reflect the people who live here as well. And, you know, one of the things that has been big in a lot of cities, particularly to help kind of develop the capital for some of the smaller developers, is making sure there's partnerships with some of these developers, just like they do with GCs. The same happens for developers. So looking at what those models could look like to really make sure we're expanding people's capacity, because we want everybody to win. And so we recognize that entrepreneurship, it isn't my cup of tea, but we recognize that really has been, when you look at the people who are really, really wealthy in this country, it was never from working from somebody else. So we want to ensure we are ensuring economic mobility for all people who live here. And we know that that is one of the ways. And certainly development in this city is a great way to do that. And supporting all folks who do it is an important priority of the mayor's.
Let me close with a question neither of you will probably want to answer, which is, you're talking about, we've talked a little bit about the land bank. Councilmanic prerogative still exists here in Philadelphia. Are you shutting the mic? It would be remiss not to raise this issue, right? Can either of you talk, either from a national standpoint or locally, to what can be done? And actually, I mean, I think this bill did make some inroads, perhaps incremental at best. But what can be done to disperse land in a more just, less political way?
So I'm going to avoid the majority of that question because, again, I like my job. But I will say, coming from Chicago with 50 aldermen, that also has councilmanic prerogative, this is easy work. We've only got 10 who really care. The other 7 are at large. But what I will say...
You had Ed Burke, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good old... Never mind. I'm not going to comment on Burke. But
he's in jail now.
May he rot in jail. But anyway, so that's in Chicago, guys, not here. So what the home plan did is we have I'll call it a pilot. And so we are going to have 1,000 parcels, which I referenced. It's up to 1,500 square feet. And it's not that we're getting rid of councilmanic prerogative per se, but we're front-loading it, if you will. So we're going to so what we're doing now is going through all the city land in every council district. We have it mapped out. We're going to sit down with each district council member, and we are going to somewhat model what could happen on each of those parcels, and we're going to agree to 1,000 units that then, for those of you who aren't familiar with the process now, what could end up happening is you could choose a parcel from the land bank. You could spend some time and money kind of coming up with your design, and then the council member may not approve it. So we're trying to front load it, so by the time you're looking at it, you know you can move forward. And so we will have taken that on the front side. We'll have agreed with what the land will be and what the plan for that land will be, and we'll have all the community meetings before it even gets to you. And so by front-loading it and getting the council authorization, then you're just going through the land bank board. And so we're hoping it'll save time because we're going to do all of that work this summer during council recess. Hopefully, in the fall, start going through the different district council members. We'll probably have the meetings over the summer, and so we'll move forward with the legislation for those first 1,000 pieces of land. And I call it a pilot because that's all we're authorized to do, and then we'll see how that goes.
I actually
I'll
love
let-
that. I love the front-loading idea,
Yeah.
and that's why I asked.
So I'll let you maybe talk about the overall, because I'm not touching that one.
Well, the bottom line is housing has now become a central component of whether a place can grow. I mean, this is a fiercely competitive country. And again, no one really has your back, right? So you're competing with a lot of large cities in Texas and large cities in other parts of the country that do not erect many barriers to growth. And there's lots of downside to that. But that's what's at stake here. You know, can Philly send a signal, and I think you have, that we're in a different game now, we get it, and we're gonna have to get about the business of not just dealing with housing affordability, but dealing with growth in a different way. So I think that, you know, you're not alone in this country, and we can see where the growth has occurred. And, you know, everyone talks about the fact that the U.S. is not building anymore. Oh, they're building in Texas, trust me. You know, they're building in other parts of the country, fast.
I'm sorry. We're gonna. You can talk. You can perhaps talk afterwards. Listen. This has been a great conversation with two of the leading thinkers on this, a doer and a thinker on this topic. And I hope you both would come back again as this develops, because this is going to be a dynamic issue for as long as the eye can see. So I can't thank you both enough.
Thank you.